last step here in finalising our wood float is just applying a finish. So for this particular finish, I'm going to paint a clear polyurethane finish on the top of this. This is an oil-based paint, so it's important to understand the differences in our bases for paints. Some paints may be a water-based paint, and that's fine. You can clean up using water, so you can clean your brush using water. You can clean down anything else that paint is on that you want to get off with water. With the oil-based paint, it's a little bit different, so we need to just be a little bit aware of the type of paint we are using. This particular paint is an oil-based paint. Okay, so it's polyurethane. If you're not sure, have a look on the label and just have a read and see. In the cleanup section, so on that back there, this one in particular says that we will need to use terps to clean up. So I have terps here. I've put some of that terps in a container here. I'll be using that to clean my brush later on down the track. A couple other things I have here with me. I have a paint tin opener. That will be to open that paint tin. Make sure you use the paint tin, nothing else. A mallet to close the lid. I've got my brush. I also have a waste board here. Okay, and just another block. So we don't want to get paint on the bench. Don't use newspaper. Newspaper sticks to your paint, and then that newspaper sticks to your work, and then you have to sand it back again. It becomes very messy. I also have another block here. That's just to sit my work up off that wasteboard so that I can paint all around the edges. Okay, so firstly, using to open the paint tin, you need to be very careful. This is the tool you're going to use. Okay, don't use a screwdriver. Don't use a chisel or a steel rule or anything like that. Okay, so if we get this tin open, okay, give it a stir. I've already given this one a stir a little bit earlier. Okay, and when we do brush, try to avoid, well, when we are using the paint, try to avoid getting that paint inside that gutter or the rim of our tin. Okay, when you do put that lid back on, that essentially glues the lid back on, making it very difficult to get that paint, to get that lid off. When we are painting, okay, using the paintbrush here, so when I hold the brush, it's very much like a pencil. So holding with your thumb and your index finger there, and then your middle finger there like so. So we can quite easily brush that way. Okay, when you do get paint on the bristles, 10 mil maximum, 5 to 10 mil on the bottom of the bristles. Don't try and scoop up as much paint as you can and get it all done in one go. You actually want to take your time with evenly applying that paint to your work. So if we just get a nice easy amount, so I just controlled amount, and you can see on that brush I don't actually have a lot of paint on there. Now when we paint, brush strokes are with the grain, similar to when we were sanding. Okay, so keep that direction the same way, and you want to get a nice even coverage. Try to avoid drips. Okay, drips happen when you have too much paint on the brush and you're trying to go too fast. Okay, so just take it nice and easy. We will paint 4 light coats on this, and in between each coat we'll do a very light sand just to even that out. You'll notice painting the end grain, it does tend to soak in a bit. We'll drink that up, so we need a little bit on there. And just get a nice even coverage all on the inside. Any spots that we might miss, we'll go back over. Just be mindful, these brushes, they do tend to leave bristles. It's easier to get them out if you get them out before that paint dries. So pick them out before the paint dries, and then you can continue to paint without leaving any of those marks. We're only painting the top, so don't try and paint the bottom that does affect the way that this wood float actually works when you're troweling your concrete. So just the top. Get up and in there, dippling, both sides. So I'm not painting this end yet because I'm holding my work there. So that's the last part I'll do when it's sitting on the bench. So you're looking for a nice, consistent, even coat for our first coat. Like I said, we're going to build this up slowly over 4 light coats, so you don't have to do it all in one go. Okay, if you see any drip marks, brush them out before it starts to go hard. Okay. Now, because we've got an oil-based paint here, this is going to take 24 hours before we can touch this. Don't try to sand it. Don't try to rub steel wool on that. Don't try to paint it again. We will wait for that to properly dry and to properly cure before we add our next coat. Now, quickly, for cleanup, obviously, like I said before, we are cleaning up using terps, so mineral turpentine. So clean up your brush. You'll usually have a station to clean and then a station to store your brush. There. Look after your brush. Okay, a dirty brush and it will leave marks on your work. When we're finished with our tin, make sure that the tin goes on and it's properly sealed. So I'm not going to, I see some students hitting this really hard with a hammer. Okay, if you are going to hit it, we hit it with a mallet and we spread the load. So I'll just grab just that bench hook, that can sit over the top nicely. Get your mallet and gently tap that to seal that tin there. Just bring that around there so you can see. Once your first coat of clear coat has dried, you can start the next coat, but before you do, just run your finger along and you can feel that under that first coat, it does leave quite an abrasive surface. So before we do paint our next, or apply our second coat, we will just lightly sand or we'll rub that surface back with some steel wool. Okay, so if you don't have steel wool, you can also use just like a 400 grit wet and dry. That will do the job you're after. So what you want to do, just get your steel wool like that, get it into a bit of a ball. Okay, and same thing as when you're sanding, just your strokes nice and consistent and even and running with the grain. Now that you've sanded that first coat back, just make sure you don't have any dust left over on that surface there that could contaminate your finish on the wood float there. Before we paint, so let's open up our tin. I'll give this a stir. We are going to be using terps in this to clean up our brush. So just make sure you're wearing an apron and make sure you're also wearing safety glasses as well. So I've just given that paint a little bit of a stir, just to mix that up. So our brush in here, that's been sitting in terps, so just try your best to get as much of that terps out of those bristles. I have some paper towel here as well that we can just soak up that. You don't want to be painting your work with that terps there. Okay. Now, same process with the painting. So I have my wasteboard here so I don't get any of my paint on the bench. I have another piece of timber here. That's just to prop my work up so it doesn't sit on the wasteboard and glue itself when that paint dries. Okay, when we paint, same thing, just a little bit at a time on your bristles. Okay, and we paint with the grain. So our brush strokes are with the grain. Any little spots where you feel you may have missed the first time, try and get that done first. So it gets a little bit tricky up in there. So make sure you get that nice and covered. A little bit here on the end grain. So go through the same process for your second coat. Just evenly paint that whole surface. Once you've finished painting, just check, make sure you have an even coverage all over your product. Okay, there are no drip marks. If there are drip marks, just try and brush them out now, okay, before it does dry. We need to clean up our brush. Brush maintenance is extremely important. You should have 2 containers here. Both of them are filled with mineral turpentine. There is one for cleaning, so I'm going to just clean my brush out in that one. Okay, try not to make a splash. And then we store that in that container. There, put the lid on that. All good. And then when we put the lid on our paint tin, make sure that it is sealed. So I'm just going to press that down. The older the tin, the harder it is to seal. So you may have to force that a little bit. So if you do have to, don't just get a hammer and just start belting that. Okay, we're going to use just this bench hook that can sit over the top. Okay, and we can hammer that down without doing any damage to the lid. If you damage the lid, then that doesn't seal the tin properly. The paint inside goes off and dries before you get to use it. Okay. That should take 24 hours to dry and cure properly. Once that happens, then we can again repeat the process, rub that back and apply our third coat.